What'd you buy it with your $150?
I haven't even got it yet.
Have you?
Yeah, I went to the bank and they were like, yeah, we can't do it today. They're not open on Sundays.
My knee is hurt, so I'm going to sit down. So don't push the eject button over here because I don't know how to go fast. You know what eject button is? Or then my scramble. Scramble goes to watch the play. I'm thinking you can hear what's on there because you enjoy it.
You may see it.
And go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 1. While you're getting there, just a couple of quick announcements. A couple things. One is on Christmas, I mentioned this last week, but on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, those are both on Sunday evenings. And we are going to, since oftentimes people have family or friend type dealios going on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve in the evening, we're going to move our services an hour early on both of those nights. So rather than 6 to 7:15-ish or whatever, it'll be 5 to 6-ish, 6:15-ish, something like that on the 24th and the 31st, okay? No keggers after the service on the 31st, okay? All right. So anyway, that's an announcement. Second one is for any kids who want to, and kids of all ages are more than welcome, but I was specifically thinking like actual children. We're going to, they're going to help, they're going to sing a song on Christmas Eve and then help lead a couple of others. And any of them who want to, or if you have children in your life and you want them to be a part of that, we're going to practice on the 13th. That's a Wednesday. So not this Wednesday, but the next Wednesday. We're going to practice after school at 3 o'clock. So basically, or whenever they get here. So if they're at South School, they can just walk here. If they're at North School, they can catch the shuttle, make arrangements for them to catch the shuttle to South School, and then they can walk here. If for some reason, and you might want to check this with the teachers, if they say, no, they can't just walk there, an adult has to escort them, somebody let me know. I'll walk over there and walk them here, and that's totally cool. Okay, so a note, make arrangements with the teacher, but anyway, but we're going to do that on the 13th, and we'll practice then, and then we might show up early on Christmas Eve, just make sure we remember what we practiced, but that's going to happen, okay? Third thing is, I just want to read this. I don't know if you remember, a couple months ago, Abigail Dawson, a friend of Sammy's, she came and spoke. She's going to be next semester going to somewhere in Asia, I think, with an organization, a teaching organization, where they go to education things, but they kind of do mission work in the process. And she came, and we decided to support her. I can't remember for how much. But anyway, she was here last week. And if I had known she brought a thank you card, I just made her stand up and read it herself. But she hit me with that afterwards, little dirty dog. So anyway, so I'm going to read what she said. Dear Grace Project, I can't thank you all enough for being a part of my Project 5.16. Without your faith in the Lord, this opportunity to spread the gospel in Asia and the Middle East wouldn't be possible. And I can't wait to give you all updates on how our mighty God is working. Thanks so much, with love, Abigail Dawson. So anyway, so she handed that to me last week, and I just said, I'll put it on my stand. We'll read it next week. Yeah.
Can Jill share a fun? I know we do monthly reports, but we have a fun one that just happened.
We're all about fun.
And I asked her if she would, and she said she will.
Party time. Excellent. Here, do this. Do this. Just check one. Yeah, I love the mic.
The Grace Project just did a really neat thing this past week, and most of you may not be aware of it, but we have grown to know a family from Linton, Indiana, or around Indiana, who has 3 daughters. They live a very simple lifestyle, and they homeschool and that sort of thing. Dad works, mom stays at home, so single family income. And they learned about 4 children who had been separated. They're 6 years and under, have been separated in foster care. And God just really laid it on their hearts to try to get these 4 children and add them to their family so that they can all grow up together and be siblings. But they live in a 3-bedroom modular home, and they have 3 biological children of their own in the house already. Dad works and works very hard, but I know with just their current family, they have a hard time always making ends meet. But they stepped out on faith and have gone through the process of getting these kids in the state of Indiana. said if they could have an additional room built so that there would be enough space for all these kids. One of their biological daughters gave up her bedroom and is currently living in a closet in order to help get these kids to their home for Christmas. And they, the state came in and they passed 2 inspections, and they said, if you can have your room built by December 13th, then you will be approved, and these kids could maybe possibly be together for Christmas with their forever family. So that's what we're praying and hoping for, but definitely probably by the end of the year. So the Grace Project gave them an amount of money to be able to build their room, and they started building today. So they're getting their room built for these kids.
Thank you, Joe. Which, as soon as she said that, they have 3 kids and they're getting 4 more, every parent here just kind of freaking out into hives. It's just, you can imagine just the stress of that and just the largeness of their hearts to welcome those kids.
Are girls.
Oh,
Well, that's easy.
please. Oh my gosh, I wouldn't know what to do. Oh my word. Okay. So anyway, but that just, that's part of what we want to do. When God leads in the hearts of others to do things, but they're just like, how can this happen? We want to help with that. So anyways, that was just a neat story that we got to be part of. I don't know, we might never meet these people. Jill knows them. If we can, we'd love to, but it's just one of those things. But those kids' lives will be changed forever, and we got to be a part of it. So praise God for that. One last thing, real quick. Maddie, the Bartnicks aren't here tonight because they're all sick. So anyway, mom, dad, kids, they're all sick. But Maddie, even though she's got a little cold or something going on, I don't know if you guys remember, but she's got a surgery for, it's some illness that has 3 letters to describe it, and it's, I can't remember. It's like her intestines back up or something like that. Am I saying that right? Okay. So anyway, and she has to have surgery, and that surgery is scheduled for Tuesday, and according to Jessica, at this point, it's still happening. So it was on my radar. I wanted to pray for them, and I wanted to pray for Maddie, lay hands on her and all that jazz. But they're not here, but I still want to pray for them because I know Joe and Jessica are just probably scared out of their minds. Maddie, who knows what's going on in her mind right now. So if we could, I just would like to pray for them. And can we have maybe 2 or 3 people who would be willing to pray for them, kind of holler out from your seat where you are? Do we maybe have 2 or 3 volunteers? Anyone? Oh, don't let everybody jump up at once now. You're freaking me out. Awesome. I got one more. I feel like an auctioneer. Do you want to? You can pray for it. Go for it. All right. Sold to the man in gray. Okay, that's good. So let's pray. Let's pray for Maddie and for Joe and for Jessica and their whole family, and just ask God to be working in their lives and situations. So let's pray.
Dear Lord, just going into surgery, please be with Jessica and Joe as they're probably the most nervous. Just be with them and comfort them in their time of need, and please be with Maddie. She might not have a complete understanding of what's going on, but that can be a scary situation for a child. So just give her your peace and just be with her throughout the entire procedure and just help her. And please be with the doctors and just guide their hands. They have the training, but they always need the power of you to get through. So just be with them, be with all of them. We trust in you.
Lift up the Bartnick family to you, God. They have every reason to be anxious, God, and I just pray that you would give them peace. That God, in this great time of need, that they would know that you are the source, God, of that peace. And we do pray, God, that you be with Joe and Jessica, Lord. We pray specifically for Maddie, God, that the surgery would go well. That you would guide the doctor's hands, God, that it would be swift and complete, God. We pray that this would be the end of this dilemma that I know that they've battled for a while. So we just lift them up to you, God. Pray pray for your incredible grace and mercy, God, and for your provision in this matter. Thank you, Lord.
God, thanks for hearing our prayers. Thanks for working in their lives, and we're anxious to see what you're going to do. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate that. Okay, so Matthew 1. We're going to be starting, we're done with 1 Corinthians. We're going to be starting in Matthew. And just, when I'm kind of planning what I'm going to be preaching, just, to me, a logical schedule is, this time of the year, kind of starting now, kind of leading up to Easter, is a logical time in my mind, for us to focus on the person of Jesus. So, 2 years ago, we looked at Luke. Last year, we looked at Isaiah, some of the prophecies in Isaiah. That was a tricky one. But this year, we're going to look at Matthew, okay? And we won't be able to do the whole darn book because it's like thinking long. So we're just going to grab pieces as we go along. But from now until Easter, that's what we're going to be doing. We're starting in Matthew 1 tonight. But just kind of start with a story. Brett Compton is a friend of mine. I count him a good friend. I don't know if he would say the same, but anyway. But I count him a good friend. I value his friendship immensely. But that friendship really started to form and deepen almost 5 years ago. Our boys, specifically Ezra and Connor, are the same age or the same grade. So they have played in sports together in a number of different contexts. And so we had rubbed shoulders a little bit prior to kind of the incident that I'm about to tell you. Coach baseball. And, the spring comes on and it's time to sign up. Sign your kids up. And so I signed up Ezra for coach pitch. I signed up Simon for T-ball. And I signed up to coach, to be one of the coaches on both of their teams. And so anyway, and I just assumed that's happened. I coached Ezra for 2 years in T-ball, and I was going to coach Simon. And so, weeks later, whatever, when, they're starting to get ready for the draft and whatnot, I get information about who I'm coaching with on Simon's team for T-ball. And I'm like, okay, that's fine and good. Who am I coaching with on Ezra's team? And they said, well, you're not. I'm like, what do you mean I'm not? I signed up to coach. And basically, there were which this probably never happens, but they had more than they needed of people to sign up to coach. And so, they kind of had a deal where it was kind of like, you had a coach and an assistant coach, and, they didn't really want more than that. And so somebody needed to kind of be bumped, and they bumped me. And so anyway, when I found that out, I was like, why am I not coaching? And that was explained to me. But when it was told to me, what the individual said, who's a friend of mine, not Brent, by the way, but it was another friend. But what they said to me, were like, but we figured it was okay because you're still coaching Simon's T-ball team. And my first thought was, there's no way you're going to pacify me by telling me I get to coach Simon's T-ball team. Because everybody knows that should be like the third layer of hell of coaching a T-ball team. It's just miserable. It's awful to coach T-ball. I mean, there's nothing fun about it because almost every kid on that team almost, it's like they're digging in the dirt. The whole time you're like, stop digging in the dirt. Stop picking your nose. Stop wiping it on him. Stop wiping it on me. It's just like the whole time. That's what T-ball is. And so you kind of put in your time with T-ball for the kind of the privilege of coaching them as they get older. And so that's why I signed up to coach Ezra, and I signed up to coach Simon because I wanted to coach him at the older levels, or at least kind of I thought I did. And now I'm perfectly content not to. But anyway, so when I found out, I was mad. I'll be honest, I was hot. I did not probably respond in the most Christ-like way. I felt kicked to the curb. I felt like I was on the outside. I'm like, how? Jennifer's smiling because she remembers me just running my mouth constantly and getting my martyr complex going on and whatnot and all this jazz. And so anyway, weeks went by, the draft happened, and Brent and Dave Hyatt, they were coaching together, and they drafted Ezra on their team, which I was very thankful for. I didn't know Brent or Dave well at that point, but we'd coached together a little bit doing some basketball stuff. And I saw the way they worked. I saw the way they treated the kids. I was very, very glad about that. By that point, I kind of calmed down, and I'm like, okay, this will be a good season. Well, like a couple days before the first practice, I get a call from Brent, and he says, "Hey, I want to know if you would want to coach with us." And I'm like, "What?" He's like, I know I was probably rude on the phone because I didn't really completely understand what he was saying. But and he's like, "I want to know if you want to coach with us." And I'm like, and then instantly my mind's thinking, somebody heard me running at the mouth, and and it got around. He's feeling sorry for me, and I don't know, maybe that still was the case. But I said, "Brent, you don't have to do that." I said, I can just be a dad. I can be there, to help when need be, but I don't need to coach. And he's like, no. He said, we want someone else to help coach, and we would really like if it would be you. Would you be willing to help coach with us? Be in the dugout, be at the practice, be at the games. Would you be willing to do that? I'm like, yeah, I guess so. I guess I will. So I came. I was still, I didn't know them real well yet, and I'm like, okay, well, we'll see how this is gonna play out. So I get there, and it turned out to be a fun year because we had an amazing team. I mean, you always draft 3 or 4 kids that are pretty good. But then there were a couple of kids that nobody knew how good they were because they were new in town, and they drafted them, and they turned out to be amazing. We had it was a phenomenal year with very little effort or input on our parts, which was fun. But I get there, and right from the get-go, Brent and Dave just threw me into the mix. They let me be a part of everything that was going on. They let me be a part of decisions. Brent would say, "Who do you think would be our good defensive lineup on this?" Including me in decisions. Dave definitely took the lead in most of the practices. Dave was a very good baseball player, and he really knew what he was talking about. So he kind of took the lead. And he was the one, this coach Fitz, he was the one doing the pitching. But they threw me into the mix. They involved me in the process. And then, when it came time for games, they pass out the shirts, and usually there's only 2 coaches' shirts. Brent had a 3rd one made for me. I was like, oh my gosh, this is for real now. I get a t-shirt. And so I donned that t-shirt with pride. The pace setter's blue. Were we blue that year?
We're gray.
We were gray that year. That's right. We were blue the next year. That's right.
Blue the next year.
So Brent and I coached together the next year, as it turned out. But gray that year. That's right. So I donned that t-shirt with pride. I'm all excited. And then games started, which as coach pitch, it's kind of helpful to have 3 coaches or at least a 3rd one ready in the wings on offense because you got 1 coach pitching and you want a base coach on 1st and 3rd, right? But on defense, you're allowed to have coaches in the field, but you're only allowed to have 2. But right from the get-go, Brent would go out there sometimes with Dave, but a lot of times he'd be like, "Tim, you go out there." I'm like, "No." I was like, "I know my role. I'm the 3rd wheel. It's okay." I'll sit in here. He's like, "No, you go out there. I'll sit in here, keep the book." I'm like, "Are you sure?" "Oh, yeah, go out there." And by the end of the season, it was like if anyone had watched, they would think, well, there's Dave and Tim coaching this team, and Brent's just in there keeping stats. That's right. He was just very giving with the roles. And really, the only kind of definitive coaching task that he saved for himself was the after the game sermon. That's his favorite part. So anyway, he can deliver a doozy. He just really kind of brought me into it. And what started as this season where I just felt very much on the outside. By the end of it, I just felt very much a part of it. I felt very much like I belonged. In fact, Chad Boatman afterwards kind of put together a little travel team. And when he was talking to Brent told me later, he said, "I told Chad I really in us that knowing that God had used grace on him. than he did on her. And that's the way we'll kind of get our brains working that way. Or, we become a follower of Jesus, and our character starts to change, and we just kind of convince ourselves, it's like, okay, I was saved by grace, but now I'm a really good person. I've changed by my own moral effort. I'm really a good person, and therefore it makes sense that I'm a follower of Jesus. It makes sense that I'm a part of this. I belong in this mix. But what if part of what makes us a follower of Jesus is that we don't belong? And what if the reason why we don't belong is because we're following a Messiah who himself didn't really belong, didn't really fit. And I know that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now, but hopefully it will after we take a look at this passage. So let's take a look at it. We're in Matthew 1, and we are going to read verses 1 through 17. And you all are going to love it. So let's read. The best passage of Scripture in the entire Bible. This is a record of the ancestors of Jesus the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. Abijah was the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was the father of Jehoram. Jehoram was the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham was the father of Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh was the father of Ammon. Ammon was the father of Josiah. Josiah was the father of Jehoiachin and his brothers born at the time of the exile to Babylon. Zerubbabel was the father of Abuid. I can't get that one. Abuid was the father of Eliakim. Eliakim of Mathan. Mathan was the father of Jacob. All those listed above include 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from Messiah. And just the way it's laid out, in fact, we get a summary at the end. At the start it says, the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. And then we get a wrap-up statement at the end. All those listed above include 14 generations from Abraham to David, and then 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 from the Babylonian exile to the Messiah. It's structured that way. And the point that he's trying to make is that Jesus fits the bill of the one that we've been looking for the Messiah. He fits this. And he's a descendant of Abraham. He's a good Jew. We know that. He's a descendant of David. He's royal. He's got royal blood flowing through his veins. And we've been looking for a descendant of David to be the Messiah, to be our king. God promised one would come, and he fits that bill. And the Babylonian exile, he maintained his heritage and his identity. A lot of Jews kind of lost track of their lineage. That Babylonian exile really wreaked havoc on the people of God. A lot of the 10 of the 12 tribes were just absorbed into other nations when they were attacked. The 10 northern tribes were, and then others, when they came to the Babylonian exile, they just kind of lost their identity. But he maintained. So the purpose is to say he's a good Jew. He's a Jew that maintained his identity all the way down to now. He can trace it back. But primarily, right in the middle of it, he is a descendant of David. In fact, and this is just speculation, but I'll share it anyway because I think it's interesting. He structured it to where he says 14 generations, right? From Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile, 14 from the exile to now. There's something going on with the number 14, and scholars don't really know. There's all sorts of speculations, but one of the theories that comes up time and time again was in ancient cultures, oftentimes didn't have a numerical system, so they would use the alphabet for numbers. And so, the first letter of the alphabet would have the numerical value of 1, the second, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. One of the fun things you could do is you could take your name and add up the numbers of the letters, and you get a total amount, right? I thought about trying to do that with my name, but Timothy, and the T's are kind of at the end. I just ran out of fingers and toes. So anyway, but in Hebrew, David adds up to the number 14. That might be what's going on. That might not. But because David is D is the fourth letter of the alphabet. The V sound is the sixth letter of the alphabet, and then D is fourth. So fourth, and they didn't have vowels in Hebrew. And so 4, 6, and 4, you get 14. And so if that's the case, then even the way it's structured, laid out, he's screaming. He's saying, this points to Jesus as the descendant of David. He is the one that fits the bill. He belongs. It makes sense that he is the Messiah. Years ago, when Simon was in kindergarten, I helped coach his basketball team. And there were some of us that got together. And we went over to South School, we were in practices, and Luke was on that team. And I remember, particularly one practice in particular, we were working on defense, and I almost spent the Luke played, and he did really, really well. In fact, they had many more significant plays than this, but one of my favorites was he was their kicker. And, at that age group, they very rarely kick because no kid can usually kick. And in fact, if you try to kick an extra point, they actually give you 2 points rather than 1 because you usually don't have a kid that can kick. Well, I can't remember if it was an extra point or maybe it was actually a field goal attempt. But I can't remember. We were actually in the end zone, and so we could see it, and we were somewhat close side just so we could hear the coach on the other side. And I still remember they teed it up for Luke to kick it. And he kicked, and it just came off perfect. I mean, end over end. It had the height, it had the distance. It barely missed on the side. But what I remember is I could hear the coach all the way, and as soon as it came off his foot, I hear him go, "Oh my goodness!" He just didn't expect it to happen. But Luke just had a really good season. But if you start talking about Luke playing football, one place the conversation can very easily go is, well, do you know who his dad is? Do you know who his grandpa is? Do you know who his great uncles are? Do you know who his cousin is? Because I don't know if you know about their family, but his family, there are 7. I had to check with Robin on this, but there's 7 of them that have played Division I football in the Big Ten. For you older generation, you might be most familiar with Alex Karras, who was on Webster. Remember the show, right? Webster? Is that the one? Okay. So anyway, he was on that. Well, he played for the Detroit Lions. But Tony played Division I. His dad played in the pros. Tony, you played for Northwestern, right? And his dad played in the pros. Your brother played briefly in the pros, right? Uncles, and now Luke's cousin Teddy plays for the Patriots. So yeah, no hate. I need to preface that. No hating on the Patriots. It's a matter of loving Jesus now, because some of our number are, and besides that, T-Ray, Henry, and Stephanie, big time Patriots fans. So if T-Ray was here, he'd probably be like throwing down right now. Off with the gloves. Let's go to battle. So anyway. But he has 7 family members who have played in the Big Ten, 5 who have played in the pros. So when you talk about Luke doing well in football, it's very easy for the conversation to move to where it starts talking about his family, right? And the logic, the thinking is, well, of course he's going to do well. It's in his blood. It's in his family. He belongs in that environment. It makes sense that he would do well. And in a sense, that's what a genealogy is. It says, look at his family. It makes sense that Jesus would be the Messiah. He fits the bill. But here's what's cool about this genealogy. It is making the point that it makes sense for Jesus, that he fits the bill, that he belongs as the Messiah. But it also says that he doesn't quite fit. Because there's some speed bumps in the passage. I don't know if you noticed them. But if you're going through it, that's the way I think of them. I just think of it because you're trucking along and all of a sudden it's like, there's something else in there. Because, a genealogy, as was typical in ancient genealogy, it was dude gave birth to dude. Dude gave birth to dude, right? Which we know it doesn't really work that way. But nevertheless, in their minds, that's all that mattered because it was patriarchal culture, right? But in this genealogy, you have dude gave birth to dude. Dude gave birth to dude. Dude was the father of so-and-so. Dude was the father of so-and-so. And then there'd be just kind of a speed bump, and there are 4 women mentioned, right? Right? Kind of scattered through it. 4 women mentioned. And so Matthew's saying something by putting these women in the genealogy, because last time I checked, with all of those births, women were involved. I mean, that's just, I wasn't a biology major in college, but I think that's the way it works. So women were involved in all of those, but he mentions 4 of them. So what's he saying with that? Well, if you look at the 4, they're just very interesting individuals. The first one's Tamar. You can read about her in Genesis chapter 38. It's a very interesting story. Simon has been reading through Genesis the last couple months, and I still remember when he came to me and said, Dad, can I talk to you about this? And I was like, note to self, don't let my kid read the Bible unattended. Because the story of Tamar, it's weird. It's rated R. It's Judah, who is the descendant of, is out of his line that the Messiah comes. Jesus is described as the Lion of Judah. Judah has 3 sons. His oldest one marries Tamar. He dies, and so she is supposed to marry the second son to try to produce an heir. He dies, and so the third one isn't quite marrying age yet, but Judah says, just hang on for a few years. When he gets older, you can marry him too. Well, then he doesn't do that, and she's seeing, my future is kind of in jeopardy. So Judah, who by this time his wife had passed away, he's kind of on a journey, and so she dresses up as a prostitute. He solicits her, and a pregnancy results. And out of that, and you can read it for yourself if you want to hear the end of that story, but basically a pregnancy results, and out of that pregnancy comes one of the ancestors of Jesus. Jesus came out of that situation. That's in his past. The second one is Rahab. Rahab, she was a prostitute. She was a prostitute in Jericho. When they went to conquer Jericho, she hid the spies, and she said, I'll make you a deal. I'll hide you. But I know what you guys are about to do. You're about to destroy us. And I'm just asking this, have mercy on me and my family, because I know God is with you. And so they did. And she became a part of the people of God and married in. And Jesus came out of that. And that's in Jesus' past as well. Rahab. The third one is Ruth. Ruth is from Moab. It's a wonderful love story. I mean, you read about it in the short book of Ruth. It's a wonderful love story. But wonderful story, but she's from Moab. She's not a Jew. She doesn't belong in the mix, and yet she's there. And then the fourth one is, it doesn't even say her name. It says the wife of Uriah the Hittite, right? Which I just thought, wow, they don't even say her name. That's just brutal. But that's the story of Bathsheba. If you remember in 2 Samuel, King David is not out at war like he's supposed to, where the kings are supposed to be. He's back in Jerusalem. He's bored. He's taking a walk on his roof. And she's up on her roof of the next door taking a bath. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's just one of those, it's like, either she should have been taking a bath and should have known better, or if that's a normal thing, then he should have been walking on his roof knowing who his neighbor is. It's just like, figure it out, but that shouldn't have happened. But he looked over there, liked what he saw, invited her over, they had an affair. She gets pregnant. He invites Uriah back home to try to get him to go back to kind of sleep with his wife. Uriah won't do it because he's a very noble man, and his troops are still in the battlefield. And so David basically arranges for Uriah to be killed, and then marries her. And then out of that, a child is born. The child ends up dying, but they have another child in the future. And out of that lineage, that's part of Jesus' past as well. And so, these 4, and so if you look at these 4 women, I mean, what 3 of the 4, there's kind of some little bit of scandal going on there, right? And all 4 of them are not Jewish. They're outsiders. They don't belong. They just don't fit the bill of a pure lineage for the Messiah. And even if you look at, there's actually a 5th woman mentioned in this lineage, right? Mary. And if you look at that, well, you can't say anything bad about Mary. Well, I can't. But I guarantee you her neighbors did, right? I mean, think about that. I mean, you know, they know how this whole pregnancy thing works. They knew they can add on their fingers. They knew that, you know, 3 months isn't enough time, you know, for a baby to be born. I mean, they can figure that out. And so they know there was something going on there. And, you know, and she can say till she's blue in the face, well, you know, God got me pregnant, you know, but that doesn't fly, you know, most of the time. You know, I mean, people don't really bite into that. You know, you say that, and it's like, yeah, honey, I tried that line too. It didn't work. You know, it's just kind of like, you know, that's not going to fly. And so even though she did nothing wrong, even though she was a perfect picture of faithfulness and obedience, I guarantee you she knew what it was like to be an outsider. And I would bet that Jesus knew what it was like to be an outsider, because he would have been raised in a very conservative, you know, first century religious, Jewish environment that probably would not have necessarily treated them well. There would have been the whisperings behind their back, you know, and Jesus would have grown up with that. In fact, we might even get a hint of that, because later when he's an adult, when he's doing his thing, and he's doing his miracles, there's a passage in Mark chapter 6, where they say to each other, they say, "Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't Tim's just this bum." We don't know who Pops is. We don't know. You know, might be Joseph, it might not be Joseph. You know, we don't know. Joseph might have been covering for somebody. And so Mary probably experienced that in her adult life, and Jesus probably grew up with that. They knew what it was to be an outsider, the pain of that, the struggle of that. And why would Matthew put all that in there? Well, maybe because he's trying to communicate. Is he trying to communicate that it makes sense for Jesus to be the Messiah, that he belongs? That he fits the bill of the Messiah? Absolutely. That's a big purpose in that genealogy. But the fact that he says he's saying something else there. And I think what he's saying is that he's also the Messiah for the outsiders. He's not just the Messiah for the people with the perfect lineage and the perfect past and with no skeletons in the closet. He is the Messiah for the people who have a past, who have skeletons in the closet, who are broken and hurt, and they don't bring that pristine family. They don't bring that pristine character with it. And, you know, and when I say that, it's easiest for us to say, well, you know, that was Jesus' family. Jesus was perfect. He didn't do anything wrong. And that's true. He didn't. But in the ancient world, you weren't just evaluated by who you were and what you did. You were evaluated by who your family was. And so for all practical purposes, Jesus had a past. Jesus had skeletons in his closet too. You know, he had, there were some black marks in his track record. And here Matthew starts out his story of Jesus by putting them front and center and saying, this is part of who he is. In fact, I half wonder if maybe Matthew did that because Matthew was an outsider. I mean, Matthew, he was a tax collector, that's worse than being a Gentile. I mean, a Gentile, if you're a Gentile and you act like a Gentile, at least you're consistent. You know, a Jewish tax collector, you're a sellout. You're the worst of the worst. Matthew would have known what it meant to be an outsider. I wonder if that's why his heart is even sensitive to that, even here, right at the start. So what does that mean for you and me? You know, whether we want to admit it or not, our pasts oftentimes, I think, present a problem for us when it comes to being a follower of Jesus. I think they do. I think they do. You know, oftentimes before we know Jesus, we can kind of get in this mindset, well, I can't follow Jesus. You know, I have a past. I got skeletons in my closet. This is a part of who I am. And there's no way perfect Jesus would want that as one of his followers. And, you know, to that, I think if he was talking to you, he would say, you know, I have a past too. You know, I know what it's like to be an outsider. I know what it's like to not have a perfect track record, even though he himself was perfect. I know what it's like to be regarded that way. I think he would say that to us. And I think he would do that. I think he would do that because that's the way God works. That is God's move. If you look at from the beginning of Scripture to the end, what God does is he always chooses to work through those that you would the least likely ones for him to work through. That's always what he does. He takes those who are broken and he heals them. He takes those who have a past and he gives them a future. He takes those who are not right and he makes them right. He takes those who are wounded and he makes them whole. That's what he does. And that's what Matthew's laying out for us. And he would want us to hear that. That Jesus isn't the Messiah, is not just the Messiah for the perfect ones, he's the Messiah for the broken ones. And if you have a past, if you think on parts of your life and you think, oh, I'm filled with such shame when I think of that, he would say, I gotcha. I understand that, and I'm here for you as well. But even after we choose to follow Jesus, sometimes we get to the point where, okay, that kind of gets in our rearview mirror a little bit because, he changes us. He begins to bring about changes. And so, you get 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, all of a sudden that broken person I used to be, it's not quite as, I'm not quite that bad anymore. And sometimes we forget who we were. And you know what I think Jesus would say to that? I think he'd say, don't completely forget who you were. Don't forget, because then we tend to be proud. We tend to think, yeah, I'm good. I belong here. And I think Jesus would say, don't forget who you are. Don't forget your past, because that's exactly the type. And for all of us, that means that we have. And they're still in that brokenness. And maybe they don't fit our definition of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. That's okay. Because that's exactly the type of people he called. If he called dirtbags like you and me, he can call any dirtbags that he wants to. And that's just that's just the way it works. And he can make those on the outside and bring them close. When we were in Kentucky a couple weeks ago, I got to visit with one of my friends that I went to high school with. And it was wonderful hearing his story. I didn't realize how impoverished it was, but he really grew up with nothing. And and I asked him to tell his story because I knew he had really done well for himself, and they had chosen to come back there. And when I asked him to tell his story, he started in that, and that's when I found out how little he had growing up. He said, I had nothing growing up. And he said, I just didn't really have a vision that I could kind of get out of this. And he said to me, Tim, he said, actually, your dad was one of the first ones that put that idea in my brain. He encouraged me to apply to an Ivy League school. And he said, I didn't do it, but just the fact that he believed I could, it made me think, oh, maybe I could do this. And he was always saying to me, just get out of here. Get out of here. Go do something with your life. Just don't look back, because you can do whatever you want to do. You can be whatever you want to be. So he did. He left. He went to University of Louisville, Speed School Engineering. He got his degree in electrical engineering. Got a number of wonderful jobs, and really got to a point where, he just was living the life. Just making bank. And then just 4 years ago, he and his wife, they uprooted their family and they moved back there. His job, he kept his job he could do remotely and traveling and whatnot. But his wife started working for the mission, and they just live a very humble life now. And they use their time and their energy and their resources to just pour into the people there. And when he was telling the story, he said, I want to do. All of us have a past. All of us are broken. All of us have known what it's like to be on the outside. And Jesus says, I made you an insider. I brought you close. And don't forget those who are still on the outside. God, I thank you. I thank you for your love and for your grace. I thank you that when you see our brokenness, you're not turned off by that. when you see our brokenness, it's not like you throw your hands up in despair and not sure what to do. When you see our brokenness, you're not so repulsed by us that you don't want to have any part of us. God, I thank you that you identify with those who are on the outside because you experienced it yourself. And so, God, help us to, if there's any here who does not know you as Lord and Savior, and part of what's holding them back is just the shame of their own lives, God, I pray that they will hear and see in you someone who identifies with them in their shame. And God, for those of us who are your followers, God, I pray that we will not get so proud of the changes that have happened to us that we forget who we are without you, and that we'll just continually have a loving, kind hand reached out to those who are still on the outside, welcoming them in. God, may that be true of us. In Jesus' name. Go ahead and stand. Yes. Go ahead and be seated. Just for a few moments. Joey, would you just play something? Just play something. And just take a few moments, and we're going to take communion here in a minute, but this might be one of those nights where it's just a good time to just spend some time thinking through what's in your past, the shame that you have a hard time letting go of, or maybe you let go of it in all the wrong ways through your own pride and through your own arrogance. And we just maybe need to spend some time just bringing those things to the Father, trusting that Jesus is taking care of them, but then humbly thanking Him for it. Not because we're so wonderful, but just simply by the goodness of His grace. So let's just spend a few moments just in silent prayer. And then after a few minutes, I'll pray, and then we'll pass out the communion trays. Okay? But let's just spend some time praying. Thank you for your grace shown us in the person of Jesus on the cross. I thank you that we can have a new life and a new start because of what He did. I thank you that the dirty things that are a part of our past and maybe even that we struggle with in the present don't define us. That they're not the last word, and that your grace trumps that if we will only allow you to do that work in us. And so we just thank you for that. We thank you that's possible because of what Christ did on the cross. We thank you that we can be new creatures.
Sorry, Daniel, I didn't mean for you to not feel like you belong. All right. The body of Christ broken for you. The blood of the new covenant, shed for the forgiveness of our sins. Amen. You go ahead and stand as we sing one more song. Jesus, we thank you, that's true. And we want to live lives of grateful. Amen. Have a great week, y'all.
Hey, can you always stop this when you're doing it? So
Yeah, sure.
go to there.